He was quite excited. I was a little more nervous and kept saying, I can't wait to be married to you, and just, I'm so in love with you, and so on. I felt that this was an opportunity to love again.
Did you know you can get the next episode of Real Crime Profile right now on the TuneIn app? On TuneIn, new episodes of Real Crime Profile are available a week early. So download TuneIn today and listen for free.
I was just confused because, to be honest, his story about having the 3 cars and the house, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I called BS on that. My mom came up before him, started questioning me, why are you asking me this and stuff? And then he came up right behind her and just started screaming at me.
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. This is Jim Clemente, former New York City prosecutor, retired FBI profiler, and writer-producer for CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today from London is...
Laura Richards, criminal behavioural analyst and former New Scotland Yard, and also spearheader of the campaigns to change the law on coercive control and stalking in England and Wales, and founder and director of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service.
And I'm Lisa Zambetti. I'm the casting director for Criminal Minds, where Jim Clemente is my colleague.
And today in studio we have a very special guest.
Chris Goffard from the Los Angeles Times.
Chris, thank you for joining us, and thank you for bringing us on to this amazing project.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. It's called Dirty John.
So we're going to be talking with Christopher about the first 3 episodes of Dirty John. So if you haven't listened to them yet, please go and do so, and then come back and listen, because we're going to be talking about them in detail, and this will definitely spoil you if you haven't already heard them. So
for anybody who doesn't know, Chris, can you tell us, what is this Dirty John project?
Dirty John is a 6-part podcast that's going to be released simultaneously, or has been released at this point, simultaneously with a 6-part series in print and on the Los Angeles Times website. It's the first time the newspaper has teamed up with Wondery to do this.
And what about this particular story did you think would be a good candidate for something like this, a multi-platform release?
It's a story with a large cast of interesting characters. There's a lot of psychological complexity. There is a twisted tale of deception and self-deception, and a lot of surprise twists, particularly grisly ending.
Well, let's talk about Debra. Who is she, and what does she do for a living?
Debra Newell is an interior designer. She runs a business in Orange County. She's very successful. She has about 30 employees, and she's built this business from scratch over the course of years. She's a name in her field. And in late 2014, she finds herself on a dating website. She's been unlucky with relationships. Her 4 kids are grown at this point, and she's looking for a man to travel with, spend some time with, share her success with. She goes online and she finds a man named John Meehan, who seems to check every box.
Yeah, I mean, certainly his profile online seems pretty interesting. He's a anesthesiologist, right? Seems to be a good-looking guy in his 50s, right? He just seems to have that it factor for Debra, doesn't he?
He's very charismatic. He's got that quality that you sometimes hear spoken of about politicians, where he looks at you and you feel like the only person in the universe.
Laura, when you were listening to episode 1 and you heard Debra talking about John, did you, like me, have a bunch of bells ringing in your ears and flags flying in front of your eyes?
I did. I had a lot of red flags and warning bells for me, but certainly when Jim said that she found him, did she find him or did he find her? And, you know, the targeting part of how people meet, and certainly online dating sites can be, you know, a challenge. But when she talks about him being the perfect person and just ticking all the boxes, I certainly never really see that in reality, when people say that it's the perfect person and the perfect package. Sometimes people can present in that way because they know what someone's looking for. But I think the first time that they go on a date and he starts pushing boundaries that makes her feel uncomfortable, they're just sort of some of the initial warning signs that when we talk about people meeting and they're going online and they're dating, about trusting your instincts and making sure you feel comfortable. And when people try and push things along and create a whirlwind situation, they're things that we always say to take care on. What did you think, Lisa?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, right off the bat, she has warning bells. He jumps on her bed, I mean, she already is like, what are you doing? I mean, it seems like right from the get-go, she knows that there is some bullshit going on here, but she just keeps going forward. And I have to, full disclosure, I met my husband on Match. But before we dated, there were lots of these guys saying, I'm a doctor, I want to take you sailing, I want to walk on the beach, blah, blah, blah. And, Paul's profile said, I like to eat cereal. If you like cereal, then you're the girl for me. But, there were a lot of guys out there who were fronting, you know.
But who did make the first approach?
Well, I guess on this website you put up profiles and you indicate that you would like to meet the person, and you text and then you meet. And she'd gone on a few dates before this, but it hadn't worked out.
Right. So he was one of a couple of guys that clicked on her profile that said, I'm interested in meeting you.
He said, you're exactly my type. And he had a chameleon ability, so that he turned himself into exactly who his victims wanted him to be.
I know.
In this case, right down to the fact that he said, I go to the church that you go to.
Yeah, he suddenly mirrors everything that she wants, and he's very attentive to everything.
Do you know if on her profile it said what her income was? Because sometimes you do have to put that, and I'm wondering if that was his sort of pond that he was...
I don't know that, but he did express a lot of interest in her business on the first date. She said he asked a lot of questions about my business. She thought that was a positive thing. It suggested to her, this is a guy who's not just into himself.
But in fact, what that is him data mining. You said he can be a chameleon. Well, he has to know what she wants in order to do that. So he asks a lot of questions in the beginning. She thinks it's, he's interested in me. But Laura, isn't that the opposite of what he's really doing?
He's gathering intelligence and information. And, again, that's something that can be very flattering when someone pays you that attention and puts you on a pedestal and puts you at the center of their world. It looks like they're very into you.
So he's now gathering this data. He's raised up a bunch of notches in her mind because he's actually asking all this information about her. He's listening, and I'm sure he was listening very carefully because he had to now construct his life around what she was looking for. But he leaks out information right from the start, almost right from the start, when he comes to her place and he jumps on her bed and he's like, wow, this is amazing. Well, that was unintentionally telling her, I haven't slept in a bed like this in years, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that he's telling her that he wants to move into a sexual realm, and she was not ready for that. And she did not think that was appropriate, yet he did. And so that's something that you have to understand. If you're a guy trying to build a real relationship with somebody, that's not what you do right away.
I was going to say, but of course he's very charming with it all, is he not? And charm can be, again, very absorbing, but I always feel that charm disarms people. So, when people are very flattering, when they're very charismatic, when they're appearing in a certain way, then, asking more questions about that. The fact that he is overstepping boundaries, but it's dressed up in a charming way, is very flattering for her. And she's obviously a very successful woman. She is smart and astute and, has been in control of her life. But somehow he makes her feel bad about her putting the boundaries back on him. So I think it's an interesting dynamic right from the start of the first date.
Christopher, I wanted to ask you, it is mentioned early on that she's been married 4 times. Can you expand on that? Did you find out anything about her relationships and what happened with them, or what she had a pattern at all? Or
I mean, she would tell me that she trusts easily. She tends to see the best in people. If there's a red flag, a friend of hers tells her that she mistakes red flags for a parade, and she rushes right. She rushes right in. Her friends and her family tells her that she has a bad picker. My experience with her, she's a really big-hearted person, very, very kind person.
Easy to take advantage of.
You would like her, but her kids and people who know her and love her say that she tends not to see the darkness in people on first meeting them. So.
But in business, she's smart, though, right? I mean, her business decision, she is successful, is she not?
Absolutely. She does very well for herself and works very hard. And I guess it's an illustration of the different forms that savvy takes. I talked to John's ex-wife, and she had kind of a similar experience where.
So most of what she knew about John.
Yeah, most of what his wife Tanya, who married him in Ohio, thought she knew about him was false. He gave the woman he was marrying a fake name. He added to his name. It was never Jonathan. It was John, and he shaved 5 years off of his birth date.
I wonder why. Why 5 years? I mean.
Well, he thought it made him more appealing, right?
It could be that. There's also the fact that he was probably running from his past.
And the law.
And the law, and he had been tangling with the law off and on since he was a young man in California.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's part of his M.O.
And with his first wife, she was not permitted to speak to his family, right? There was he had said that she couldn't call any of his family members, so she really trusted in what he was telling her about who he was.
And he had an explanation for why no family showed up to their wedding.
Right.
I talked to one of the groomsmen who said, "Yeah, it was a Don Draper wedding. It was a Mad Men wedding. Nobody was there from his side." And his explanation for that was, "My parents are pill poppers and alcoholics. They're going to humiliate us. You don't want them here." And it seemed to her at the time a reasonable reason for why they wouldn't be showing up.
Right, but in fact, when she actually talked to his mother gave her all sorts of intelligence information about John. I mean, things that she had never even slightly suspected. And of course, what was John's reaction?
John's reaction was to turn against her in the nastiest, angriest way, and we have some audio of a series of extremely scary messages that he leaves for her. He was calling her and threatening her. She told the police, and they said, "Get yourself a recording kit and get some of these calls on tape." And so she was lucky enough to get them on tape, and I got them, and you can hear them in episode 3. You can hear it's some of the very little audio that survives of John.
I listen to these kinds of threats all the time in cases that I work, and some of it was sort of veiled threats, but others was very it was very overt, quite sinister, and pretty scary stuff, as you said. And against the background that we know there are multiple restraining orders and felony charges for stalking, I think it's certainly quite concerning that he's making those threats against the mother of his 2 children as well.
In the midst of handing off custody also, which was a bizarre twist to this.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's where it really just shows the extent of these types of cases and the risks and the dangers associated with cases like this. They are some of the most dangerous cases, and she had separated from him, and it's on separation that you tend to see these things escalate, and her not doing what he wanted. So here's somebody who's very focused on control. That's what you can hear in those messages. And when people don't dance to his tune, he makes threats and he wants to get revenge, and he puts the fear of God into people.
Right.
That's what I heard in those messages.
And it was a pattern that repeated itself over and over and over. And you can read in restraining order after restraining order that women all over Southern California took out on this guy.
Wow.
The same pattern of intimidation and menace.
But of course, Debra does not know this when she starts her whirlwind dating of him and this kind of honeymoon period where they're dating each other and then meeting her family.
Right, and that's another thing. When you talk about the other cast of characters around Debra, even though Debra didn't seem to have a very good filter, one of her daughters did. Tell us about Tara.
Tara immediately got a bad vibe from him. Her mom seemed giddy around him, but he didn't seem to care much about even making a good impression on Tara, or even being polite. Her dogs also got very uneasy around him, which she read as maybe they were picking up on her anxiety. But he was, he's a big guy, 6'2". She is much smaller. He towers over her, a physically imposing man. But she couldn't quite put her finger on why it was she was getting this bad feeling from him.
I think I can put my finger on it, and I think Laura would agree that what it is that this guy immediately wanted to piss off her kids, wanted to alienate Debra from her children, separate her from her family so that he can control her completely. If her family is involved, then he has to win over everybody. But if he pisses them off and gets them set off to the side and they're not in her life anymore, he's free to do whatever he wants with Debra. And I believe that was a very deliberate choice, and that's why she felt that right from the beginning. It's an MO, yeah.
But in doing that, though, he creates a nemesis that becomes very powerful, which is the other daughter, Jacqueline, who puts a magnetic tracker on his car. And the other daughter and her husband hire a private eye to look into his background. So there's a consequence to alienating the kids.
Right. I don't think he's an incredibly sophisticated criminal. I think he's a low-level criminal who has tried this over and over and over again. He fails all the time, right? How many women are on that list?
There's a good handful.
Okay. And so each time that was an attempt. Of course, for him, it would have been great if one of them stuck and one of these rich ladies just took care of him for the rest of his life. But that's not what he wants. He's there for a stick and run, stick and run, stick and run. Because what's he doing? These wives that he leaves in a trail behind him are all paying him half of their money.
He is broke, though, by the time that he meets her.
I'm telling you, he's not effective at doing this. But this is what he's been doing. This is his... Con men don't necessarily think about the long game. They think about the here and now. They want to take advantage of the situation, get as much out of it as they can. They know they're a fraud, so they know it's going to come crashing down eventually. That's not a surprise. What is a surprise is if it happens really quickly, or if somebody doesn't fall for their line. Like if somebody literally says, "Are you kidding me? On the first date? Look at it. You're no doctor. Look at your fingernails. Look at the way you dress. All right, take me to your house right now. I want to see your house. I want to see your 2 cars. I want to see your boat." Nobody does that. But if somebody goes against normal interactions, normal social interactions, then that doesn't work for them because they're relying on the fact that people are going to be polite and they're not going to challenge him when he says something. If somebody does that, he's out the door. But if he can sucker you in, he'll isolate that person, make sure he has control over all their money, marry them so that he owns half of it now. He doesn't care about the daughter. The daughter will get some of her money if she happened to pass away. He doesn't want that.
Laura, you agree?
Well, I think that he's incredibly narcissistic, and what you hear is about me, myself, and I, what suits him and what suits him only, and people call him out on that.
Here was Tara sitting in the family room by herself, just crying, her eyes out, just trembling and crying. She always kind of got upset about things. And so I sat down and talked to her about that. She said, "I don't care. I don't like him. There's something about him. I don't like him." Oh, she was hysterical. She would not. She said, "I just want to leave." She said, and I was getting upset with her for doing that. I thought, this is terrible. All of our family meeting for Christmas. And she was just sitting there shaking and just crying.
There's also evidence throughout the story that he takes a kind of glee, a kind of pleasure in turning on people and tormenting them.
It's like sadistic. He loves the pain.
It's kind of a craft, is how he thinks of it. In fact, there's an email that I have of his that he wrote to one of his earlier victims that he's basically torturing. He's got compromising photos of her, and he's sending them to her daughter's Catholic school and sending them to the woman's work, threatening to ruin her and get her fired. And he tells her in an email that I have, "This will be my masterpiece." So you get a strong sense of a guy who approaches this as a job, that he takes some pride in performing at a certain level.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, and I think that we're chinking off a bunch of characteristics of somebody I would call a psychopath. Right? He's charismatic, he's glib, he's definitely sadistic, and he's gotten into trouble when he's in his teenage years. He's a fraudster. I mean, all these are on the PCLR, the psychopathy checklist revised. And so you should check out that, because I think if you go down, you're going to check off a lot of boxes for him. I think you have to hit 30 points on that.
He's got the narcissism, he's got the grandiosity, he's got the Machiavellianism, he's got the full array.
He's
manipulation, deception.
Yes. And as you were saying, what I found fascinating in the episodes I've listened to so far is that what he does is he's really careful about aggressively defending himself. The best defense is an aggressive, very aggressive offense, and that's what he is. So he's in the hospital telling Debra, "You hit me, you hurt me, you physically attacked me, I'm going to call the police." Well, now she's defensive. Well, I didn't do that. What are you talking about?
Right.
Now she's afraid the police are going to come, and so, I better appease him. I better give him That's what he's trying to get. He's trying to get control through that threat, that sort of reverse allegation threat. He knows damn well he's the criminal. He's the fraudster. She's a pure heart. She's somebody who wanted to help him. She's somebody who wanted to love him. And instead, she's now treated like, she's ugly, she's over the hill, she's worthless, she doesn't even come close to his level. All that is a lie, a complete lie, because his level is actually dirt. He's got nothing. He is nothing but a fraudster.
Can I say something that is not popular? It's not going to be popular with this group. Wasn't anybody incredibly frustrated with Debra? I mean, I found myself just having to stop and walk around and to come back and listen to it, because she seems to really know what's going on from the get-go. She sees he's a slob. All these red flags, she sees them. She knows that
he makes her feel good.
I know that, and that's fine, but she puts everything at a Thanksgiving, her daughter is basically shoved out the door, and I'm sorry, on our podcast we're very concerned about coercive control and domestic abuse and being on the victim's side, but my gosh, just even when she was talking to you, Christopher, how she would be giggling and laughing about some really horrible red flags about him, I just was like, come on, lady.
Well, she wasn't living it that way. I mean,
this is a year removed, 6 months to a year removed from
the
worst experience. But I mean, I did pose the question to her. I said, look, this is going to be the hardest part of this whole story to explain, is how, in the face of all of this evidence, I mean, she literally found a stack of evidence in the office they shared, which details a lot of his criminal history. And at first, she fled. She got out of there. She started living out of hotels, but he manages to talk her back into his life.
Right. Because what's more important from her perspective is the love. All right, now she's projecting this love on him, and she's assuming that the thing that he's reflecting back to her, remember, he's a psychopath, so he doesn't feel any of that. He's just reflecting it back. He's mimicking this love. So she feels that right back. So she feels that's the most important thing. Even if he's a bum on the street, even if he has nothing, even if he lied to me to get in here, he really does love me. That's the amazing fraud that he was able to pull off, to convince her that he was actually in love with her, despite all of this.
And he knew exactly what to appeal to in her, which was her forgiving side. And he made himself pathetic in order to win her back. He said, I need you. Yes, I lied to you because I knew that if I told you the truth about my past, you would never go on a date with me. But he had explanations for all the other stuff. What about this nickname, John, Dirty John? Where did that come from? Oh, that's ridiculous. Never heard of it. That never happened. What about this contract hit that you supposedly took out on the Laguna detectives that arrested you. Oh, that's just a ridiculous. That's a snitch talking in the jail. You can't believe him. John, what about the cyanide that they found in your stuff in Riverside County? Oh, that's because I have MS. I never told you, but if I need a quick exit, I've got it there. And that's what the cyanide is for.
Yeah.
So he's got an explanation that he's thought through for everything, and he manages to talk her back into her life. But even as she takes him back, she's got these gnawing doubts. She knows it's not right. She knows she's eventually going to have to get away from this guy. And then the question becomes, how does she get out alive? How does she get out without him hurting her or her kids?
I just can't. I know, Laura, I'm sure you don't agree with me, but I just feel like she put herself recklessly in the crosshairs of this guy. I mean, especially after, taking him back, in episode 3, after everything her family has done to get her out of this financial situation, to get her away from him, the fact that she hides her relationship going back to him, I mean, it's just, for me, it was incredibly frustrating, and I wanted to really feel for her, but it just, it was hard. Laura, are you on board with me at all?
That's pretty much how her family felt, though,
I mean, I'm not on board, I'm afraid, because I see these cases too often, and he is everything that she wants him to be. He has been doting on her every wish and whim and being everything that she wanted in somebody. And so she does feel that that is a true relationship, and she's getting what she needs from him and not from other people. And she is at a certain age in her life too, looking for a companion. She's successful in her own right. And I think it says more about his ability to con people and be the things, chameleon-esque, be those things. And for her, as we know, when people are in abusive relationships, he has shown what I would call pseudo-caring relationship or pseudo-caring behaviors to her. And, she has taken times to try and leave him. But she, as we know, that in abusive relationships, and I'm not talking about physical abuse, it takes people 6 or 7 times to leave. And so she is somebody who has taken stock, and then she goes back because he says he's plausible. He's got all the answers. And as Jim said, she likes having him around, so she compensates on some things. That's why doing this work with victims of who may not even see themselves in an abusive relationship can be a challenge. But it's not for us to judge on them and to say, well, if I was in this situation, I would be A, B, and C, because only you, the person in that situation, knows the full context. And it says a lot about him.
Yeah, and I think that part of the psychology, isn't it, that she doesn't want to admit to herself that she was taken in by this guy. She wants to believe that a man like him, a good-looking man, a strong guy with a weightlifter's build or whatever, is interested in her, physically and emotionally in every way. That made her feel good about herself. So this tells you, this is a reflection of how poor her self-image is, why she's so vulnerable to this guy. If she had a very strong self-image, if she wasn't concerned about this, then he would never have been able to pull on that thread and sort of draw her in. But it's sad, but understand that he picked her for that vulnerability, and he exploited that particular vulnerability. So I get what you're saying. I wish that it was dispassionate and she made those decisions without emotion. But I can tell you almost unequivocally, she made every decision about John with emotion.
Well, it's interesting that the other coercive control relationships that we've talked about on our podcast, it's usually the man who's in control of the finances. And, so the women, they really can't leave. They have no means to get away. So maybe that's so different in this situation. And I don't know. It's just, I'm not judging her, but it was hard for me to sympathize.
I just had such a hatred and such a good intuition about John being an evil person that I felt like I needed more facts and more evidence, because just me not liking him and thinking that he is an untrustworthy person isn't enough to tell my mom. It could look like, oh, people are just jealous that I'm happy, or it could be taken into so many different contexts.
So there's a moment at the end of episode 2 that I'd like your opinion on. I'd like your the benefit of your experience and insight. She's in her home office, and she comes across all of these papers, restraining orders for multiple women. There are printouts from womensavers.com which describe all of the ways he's a psycho and to be avoided. Why does he keep the stack of things around? The one theory is that he keeps trophies, right? He relives the rush in the way a serial killer would keep a sock or whatever. But why not keep them at some other location? Why not keep them in a storage locker off-site where we can visit them discreetly? Why there?
Because
she's sucked in, hook, line, and sinker. He doesn't fear for her because he knows he's got her under control, and it would take a lot for that to change.
Why take that risk, though?
Because psychopaths are risk takers. They're risk seekers. They're thrill seekers. The confrontation is not something he shies away from. It's an opportunity for him to prove to himself, I could talk my way out of this. I know she's no match for me. And it's a challenge that he doesn't care about, but it's a challenge that he's ready, willing, and able to take on. For you and I, it would be embarrassing if we got caught in a lie. Do you think it's embarrassing to him? Absolutely not. It's just another opportunity for him to lie better.
Even though it risks undermining his entire project.
But did it, in fact? She took him back. He did win. He did know. He had the confidence. He had already hooked her.
Yeah. She taught him how she could be handled.
And psychopaths are poor strategists. So he doesn't think that far down the line, but he has faith in his ability to talk his way out.
Immediate gratification is paramount, and for him, that's on multiple levels here. It's not only to get a place to live and sleep and to be driving around a Tesla for free, but it's so that he can know that he is manipulating her. That's a win for him. I'm doing this, not just that I get this stuff for me, but I'm doing this by manipulating somebody else who has no clue.
So the psychopath's endgame is just a series of jolts of adrenaline based on winning at deception over and over and over. That's as much of an endgame as he's got.
Can you imagine having no feelings other than that? If that was the only feeling you had, in other words, you don't get to love your partner. You don't get to love your children or your parents. You don't get to have excitement at seeing them grow up and feel this pride in being part of their lives and making their lives great. You don't get any of that. The only thing you get is a thrill from taking advantage from other people, a thrill from doing things that are very risky. You might do it a lot more often, and that's how he is.
Jim, do you think that's something he was born with, or did that come from this episode 3, Filthy, goes into his background, or do you think that developed after his parents' divorce? We read about, his background.
Anything that people do in their lives is a complicated mix of bio, psycho, and social. So in this case, I would say his genetics loaded the gun, his psychology and personality aimed it, and his experiences pulled the trigger. And I think the combination of the three things gives us who John is. One, he had the potential genetically to do this or to make decisions the other way. His personality was such. Your personality is the filter through which you experience life. So it shades and can actually twist and torment what happens. They've done twin studies where one of them sees an experience as a learning and enriching experience. The other one is angered and violent and enraged by it. They have the same genetics, different personalities to filter differently. And then they can go through the same experiences and feel totally different about it. So he had family members, right, who generally went through the same thing, only he decided, hey, I'm good looking. I can take advantage of this. I can get over on people. And he did it over and over and over, got better, better, and better. His father taught him the tricks of the trade, how to wrongfully sue somebody, how to commit a fraud and advance your own self because of it, how to make money off of other people that are unwitting. So he used those tools, and he reinforced it. There's thousands or millions of little decisions that he makes in the privacy of his own mind that help either go towards the bad side of John or away from the bad side of John. He embraced it fully, went with his entire life, every bit of energy he had to do that. Because
so when you talk about him as a psychopath, with what degree of certainty can you make that diagnosis, you think?
Well,
based on what you've read.
Well, if we went through the PCLR, right, he checked off many more points than would be necessary to become a psychopath. I mean, you have to have 30 points on a scale of 40, and I believe he's probably got 38.
Okay.
You know, he's way up there.
And his sisters give real insight to him. You know, they're the ones who knew him as well, so well, you know, across his life course. And if he does those things to his sister Donna, as she describes, and he makes threats to her, and he behaves in that way because he's angry at his mother, his father, he's angry at everybody and wants revenge, and he feels everyone owes him. So, you know, it's not a clinical assessment of sitting there assessing him in front of us, but the traits are very clear and apparent from people who hold up the mirror to him. And the sisters, for me, hold up a clear mirror, as do the ex-partners. You know, the women who all say the same patterns repeat over and over and over. He's a serial perpetrator, and he's learned some of the tools and tricks of things that work for him.
But it is astonishing how many chances his sister gives him. I mean, he's coercively controlling.
He turns even against her.
Yeah, it's crazy. And she can't get away from him.
Lisa, you mentioned that I did the Christopher Dorner series some years ago, Manhunt. This was the disgraced ex-cop, LAPD cop, who went on the killing spree that was being hunted. And I remember one thing. We all remember his manifesto, which was a long list of his grudges against people he thought had wronged him. And I remember Chief Beck in an interview saying Dorner was a grudge collector. And that comes to mind when I think about John Meehan. He perceived himself in the end as a victim whose enemies deserved what they got because they had wronged him. So if you read some of the emails he sent, some of the letters that he would write, where he kind of sums up his life, he's always the victim. He's the victim of this bad back that got him hooked on painkillers. He's the victim of his ex-wife who turned him into the cops when she found the drugs that he had stolen. Mm-hmm. He's the victim of his mom who fed stuff to his ex-wife. He's the victim of cops and judges. Everybody has wronged him at every step. And this is his self-image, and I think in his mind it justifies the reign of terror that he inflicts on them.
Right. Well, when I read that manifesto, I immediately said, this is a vulnerable narcissist. And vulnerable narcissists are people who know in their hearts they're worthless. And so they become very boastful, and they need to superimpose an amazingly successful self-image on other people. In other words, they want people to believe that they are the top of the world, the top at what they do, never wrong. And yet they know that they don't measure up. So they collect. They are injustice collectors. And they typically document them. So as soon as I started reading this, I said, I think this is a injustice collector, and this guy would be a vulnerable narcissist. And so we can talk at another time about the details of how you actually deal with them and how you appease them so that you don't end up getting them to kill more. So
we should probably...
I think we're about ready to wrap up this first installment of the Dirty John podcast and article series. It was so great, Chris, having you here. I mean, such an interesting case, and I think we could talk on it forever and ever, but I can't wait to hear the rest of the episodes.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to coming back.
So great to meet you. It's just such a privilege to meet. I was going to be a journalist before I turned to entertainment, and so it's just such a pleasure to meet somebody like you.
You know, it's a fascinating case, and thank you for covering it, because, you know, if you made this case up, people wouldn't believe it. And, you know, it's like peeling an onion. You just keep hearing more and more. And I think you've done a great job with the questions that you've asked and the interviews you've conducted. So thank you. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Laura. Nice to meet you.
All right, and now we're signing off for Real Crime Profile.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things that you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcast and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotion and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook and like our Facebook page. And one last thing is please tell all your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineered by Terrell Parham. Music composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clemente. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go on the website www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Helpline, free phone 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, safety, shelter or counselling, call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, 214-946-4357, or go on their website www.genesisshelter.org or the Domestic Violence Hotline on 800-799-7233.
Did you know you can get the next episode of Real Crime Profile right now on the TuneIn app? On TuneIn, new episodes of Real Crime Profile are available a week early. So download TuneIn today and listen for free.